Over the course of my studies in theoretical physics, I've traveled across the continent and around the world sampling new ideas and tasting different answers to the questions of how and of why. And still, I find there remains a deep hunger which lives within me, a burning desire to share these great ideas with the people around me. And so, I have assembled a team of some of the greatest, most lucid, most creative minds I've encountered in my travels. And I call them my Titanium Physicists. You're listening to the Titanium Physicist Podcast, and I'm Ben Tippett. And now, allez, physique!
It's been a hard road, there's no turning back, and there's no end inside to this darkening night, and that's a sad fact.
June 5th was a fun day. It was notable in part because the planet Venus passed between us and the Sun. The Venus transit is a fairly rare event, and it won't reoccur until 2117. Now, it was super cloudy where I lived, so I watched the event off the NASA website, and it was marvelous watching the perfectly circular shadow of Venus cross the perfectly circular image of the glowing sun. But the surface of the sun wasn't all that perfect. It looked kind of dirty. There were even little dark spots on it. Now, the spots I was noticing are called sunspots. They're dark spots on the sun. And I'm obviously not the first person to notice them. In fact, people have been recording sunspots for thousands of years. Galileo, in fact, is famous for using his telescope to study them. So here's some basic facts about sunspots. Firstly, they're little dark spots on the surface of the sun, like solar acne. But because the sun is so big and so far away, some of the big ones can be 6 or 7 times the width of the Earth. Second, they always occur in pairs. Over time, one of the two always moves towards the North or the South Pole, and the other always moves towards the equator. Third, they're related to solar flares. Solar flares usually begin at sunspots. Fourth, the number of sunspots isn't constant. There's something called the solar cycle. Sometimes there's more of them, sometimes there's less of them. So it goes from solar minimum, where there's no sunspots, to solar minimum in about 11 years. In fact, this year should be a solar maximum. There should be a ton of sunspots, but it's been kind of disappointing so far. Now, we can deduce from this fairly periodic nature that there are a very few simple elements involved in the process of making sunspots. But we can also deduce from the fact that this 11-year rule is kind of a rule of thumb. Sometimes it's 12 years, sometimes it's 10. We can tell from that the elements involved in generating sunspots are also kind of complicated in themselves. In fact, sunspots come from an interplay between the sun's magnetic field and the rotating fluid plasma that composes our star. In fact, explaining sunspots requires a mastery of a number of different fields. Speaking of mastering different fields, today my guest is a master of multiple fields. It's David Malki. David Malki is the Leonardo da Vinci of stuff on the internet. You might know him from his very silly webcomic called Wondermark, wherein Victorian-era drawings of people posit that the proper way to eat Cheetos involves the use of chopsticks. See, using chopsticks will keep you from getting the sticky orange gunk on your hands. Now, Wondermark's been nominated for Web Cartoonist Choice Awards, Ignatz Awards, and Eisner Awards. Now, you might also know David from his collaboration with Chris Straub on the Tweet Me Harder podcast. It's the world's first, best, only, and last talkback-enabled interactive audio pod blast. And you might also know him from his collaboration with our old friend Ryan North on calling for submissions for and then editing The Machine of Death short story collection. The Machine of Death was a #1 bestseller on Amazon.com, and it displaced Glenn Beck's book from the list. In other words, David Malki is Glenn Beck's personal enemy. He's also the Supreme Commander of Publicity and Promotions for the Topatoco website, and he's even been a volunteer search and rescue pilot. So, today our guest is David Malki. Welcome, Maestro.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. I don't know where we are, but as soon as I find out, I'm going to just love the heck out of it.
Oh, great. Well, I'll open the window to your box in a couple minutes, but first, I need to tell you about the titanium physicists I've assembled for you today. Now arise, Dr. Brian Sullivan.
Bazinga!
Right. Now, Dr. Brown got his PhD from Dartmouth College in Hanover, and he studies plasma physics, and he wrote his PhD on magnetic reconnection, and he's currently the physics instructor at the Maine School of Science and Math. Now arise, Jennifer Garst. Jennifer's a master's student at the University of Memphis, where she studies the coronal heating problem. Alright, you guys, let's start talking about sunspots. Alright, David, you've played with magnets before, right?
Sure, yeah. I do know what magnets are, clearly. I have used magnets to pick up a screw that fell on the ground.
Right.
I've used magnets to degauss videotapes.
Right. Evidence.
Which is entirely a separate application for magnets. And I have used magnets to, I'll say hold a thing on a fridge. That's a magnet thing to do.
Yeah, sweet. Alright, let's make this really simple for the people imagining things at home. Remember those bar magnets that you get in science class? They were like little metal rectangular bars. One part of it said north, and the other part said south.
Sure, yeah.
And did you ever have to sprinkle magnetic filings around them?
This is the thing where they are drawn sort of in like an arc shape to the magnet?
They form these kind of ears around the magnet.
Yes, I do remember this.
So, essentially, what all those iron filings are doing is they're lining up with the direction of the magnetic field. So magnetic fields are kind of invisible, and what they are kind of is they're essentially shaped like rings. Imagine a very thin loop of wire. And the loop of wire goes down the middle of the magnet, and then it comes down around the outside, and then back in the middle. So it's always a loop. There's never any free end. It's always like an elastic band.
So is the magnetic part of this hypothetical bar magnet just the end of that magnet, or what is the actual magnetic part that the field emanates from?
The magnetic field lines come out of the North Pole and go into the South Pole.
So it sort of loops through the magnet and then out in a ring shape and then back in the other side of the magnet in a continuous...
That's right. Every magnetic field line is like a serpent that bites its own tail, so it's closed.
Well, I know a lot about classical mythology, so I understand that analogy.
One way to imagine this bar is that it's not really emitting the magnetic field. What it's done is kind of gathered up magnetic fields. So each magnetic field is a loop, and the property of this iron magnetized bar is that it's gathered a whole bunch of these loops all together, and it's kind of bunched them up so they're really, really dense down the middle of the bar, and then floating out around the outside, and then looping back in.
This is sort of magnetism that exists in the world in an unorganized fashion, but a magnet's special superpower is to sort of grab them and gather them to itself.
Yeah.
Well, the atoms in the iron, each of them is like a little magnet, and iron in particular, the atoms want to line up with each other. So we call a material like that a ferromagnetic material, and it has an effect that it creates a large
fairs, like county fairs and
ferro, like
oh no,
iron.
You're sorry, ferro. Okay, it means it's like fair, like it's impartial. I get it.
It's not from Egypt either. So one of the fundamental attributes of a magnetic field is there's an interplay between electric charges and magnetic fields. So like electric charges, you rub your head on a balloon and then you give something a shock.
Sure.
Some particles, electrons, have negative electric charges on them, and some of them have positive electric charges on them.
Just depending on their attitude, sort of how they feel that day.
Well, they're stuck that way, but essentially, yeah. Some are negative, some are positive. And two electric charges with the same charge sign, so if they're both positive, they'll push each other apart. And if they have opposite signs, they'll attract each other. So the center of each atom has a positive electric charge, and that positive electric charge has attracted electrons. Electrons all have negative electric charge. And so the electrons all kind of swarm the center of these atoms and make it so that if you go far enough away from it, the negative electric charges and the positive electric charges all cancel out. And so atoms are electrically neutral because positive electric charges and negative electric charges attract.
Sure, but this is where we get into ions, huh?
Yeah, that's right. So ions are when you've taken the electric charge in an atom and you've split them up. So there are free-floating positive charges and free-floating negative charges.
Right. So if you have two of them, then you can put them in some engines and make a twin-ion engine TIE fighter, right? Is that where we're going with this or no?
No, we're not going to TIE fighters yet.
Sorry, I've jumped ahead.
That's right. We're going to electromagnets right now. The fundamental feature of electric charges is that they interact with these loops of magnetic field that I've been describing in a really specific way, which is that if you take a moving electric charge, so you take an electron, and you have a magnetic field handy, so you imagine this rubber band, the electric charge will circle the magnetic field line.
It's gyrating around the string. It orbits it.
Okay, so the ant is like walking on the rubber band, around and around and around.
No, it doesn't walk around. So if you imagine that the rubber band was shaped like a donut, blown up like a donut, where it goes from the outside through the middle, back to the outside.
Got it, yeah. It rings around the length of this band.
That's right. Okay, so it's circling the string. So what happens is magnetic fields are produced when charged particles circle, and magnetic field lines cause charges to circle. Let's break this down into some phenomena. I want you to imagine an electromagnet. And all an electromagnet is it's a piece of wire that's been coiled. You have a piece of wire and you feed it into your fishing reel. So it goes around and around and around and around, and you end up with essentially a tube of wound wire.
Sure, yeah. This is like the deal where you wind the copper wire around the nail.
Yeah, you got it. And then if you put some charges in there, so if you hook that up to a battery so that electrons flow down and go around that nail, what happens is that gathers magnetic field lines in. You imagine each magnetic field is a loop. The more charge you have going around that electromagnet, the more field lines get gathered in.
So does the loop widen or strengthen?
They kind of get denser, right?
Okay, so rather than a few, you have sort of a bunch of them, kind of like a slinky kind of spread out around your hand.
Yeah, okay, so I want you to take your hand, and I want you to touch the tip of your index finger to your thumb.
Okay.
So we're going to imagine that the electron is traveling in a loop following your finger and thumb, so it's going around and around and around. As we force more and more charges to go around this hoop, that gathers more and more magnetic fields in. So I want you to imagine you have one electron going around that circle, and that's like having one elastic band, where you've taken an elastic band and you've hooked it around your index finger. And then if you put two electrons in there and have them circling, that's like taking two elastic bands and hooking them around your index finger. And if you have a whole bunch traveling really, really fast, that's like having 1,000 elastic bands looped around your index finger that you're trying to clench in that circle. Effectively, what happens is the more charge you flow through a ring, the more magnetic fields that ring will kind of gather. And the denser the magnetic fields are, the more you've kind of squished into that little loop between your index finger and your thumb, the stronger the overall magnet will be. So you imagine those big ones at the dump that pick up cars?
Sure, yeah, I know a lot about the dump.
So you put a little bit of current through that, and it gets a little bit of magnetic fields, and then they crank it all the way up, and suddenly the magnetic fields all gather, and that electromagnet becomes strong enough to pick up a car.
Yeah, got it. I'm totally following this.
So there's an interplay. If a stray electric charge comes across a magnetic field, it'll circle it. And the more charges you have going in a circle, the more magnetic fields that circle will gather inside of it.
So it makes that magnet more attractive.
More attractive, you got it.
Sure, just like being in a bar late at night, the lower the lights, sort of the more attractive everybody is.
Just like a bar. A bar magnet.
A bar magnet. Yeah, you could. Yes, I know this is 100% my wheelhouse.
Okay, so now we have to talk about how magnetic field lines work, because you know that there's like a north pole and a south pole to your bar magnet?
Yes.
I'm sure you've tried to press them together. You can't press the two south poles together, and you can't press the two north poles together, but the north and the south pole would pull each other in, okay? So, I've described before how your electromagnet, you imagined holding your index finger to your thumb and passing electrons in that loop.
Right, and this is a magnet that comes on only when you apply an electric field to it, right?
Yeah, that's right. So you
kind of like how you sort of love your wife only when you're in public.
So you hook up the battery,
true?
and that drives a current, and the current causes the magnetic field.
Right.
The current is the motion.
You can only turn something on with the aid of battery-powered devices. I know a lot about this.
Right. So the problem with my description like that is that there's no obvious north and south in that picture. There's just rubber bands, right?
No obvious top or bottom.
So we need to add a north and south to this picture. So I want you to imagine that instead of rubber bands that you're grasping in this, imagine that you have road bike tires. You know how the treads on road bike tires are all kind of arrowed forward?
Right. So that way the cops know which direction the bike was riding.
That's right.
From the crime scene.
That's exactly right. In this case, you look at it and the wheel is always counterclockwise, say, right?
Okay.
In just the same sense, magnetic fields have kind of clockwise or counterclockwise to them. So if you imagine holding your ring that you're putting charge around and you're gathering up magnetic fields in there, you're packing in bike tires. where these bike tires all have these arrows on them. All of the bike tires are oriented so that up is through the circle, in essence, right?
Okay.
And so there's a directionality to that. And then so we could say the north is where the bike tires are coming out of the hole, and the south is where the bike tires are going into the hole.
Yeah. I'm having to sort of translate all of these to sex metaphors, but once I do, I'm on board.
And so imagine your hand again, where you've got your index finger and your thumb touching, and your bike tires going through it. If we pass electrons through your index finger touching your thumb, the issue is how these tires are oriented with respect to this little ring of circulating charges. If we pass electrons through clockwise, then the tires will end up pointing in towards your palm. If you have the electrons circling counterclockwise, then they'll all be moving in the opposite direction. And if you have positive charges, so electrons have negative electric charge, if you have positive charges, then everything I said is reversed. And the moral of the story is whether it's a positive or negative charge, and also the direction that they're circling, will determine the orientation of the magnetic fields.
So north versus south.
North versus south. Okay?
Got it.
All right. So now we can start talking about the sun. In the sun, this magnetic field thing gets totally awesome.
Suppose you have an ice cube.
Okay, I do
there?
have an ice cube here.
The ice cube? You got the ice cube?
I have it here,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, you add some energy to the ice cube. You raise its temperature. It melts.
I'm sort of crushing it in my hand.
Yeah. So what's it become?
Water.
Right. So that's a liquid.
Yes.
Now, if you boil the liquid, that becomes...
Hold on, let me do that. Okay, I'm doing that. That becomes steam.
Right. And steam is a gas.
It is.
So gas expands, and it doesn't have a definite volume or shape. The gas is composed of molecules, right? The H2O, the two hydrogens, and the oxygen. Now, if you heat that up further, the hydrogens will dissociate from the oxygen.
They're too hot
So
to handle.
They get broken up. They're too hot to handle.
I've been in this relationship many times.
Now, if you heat it up even further, each of those atoms has an electron, or several, that are orbiting around the ions that are in the nucleus of the atom. But if you heat things up enough, what happens is the atoms collide with each other, and they knock the electrons off. They're just floating free. If it's hot enough, then getting knocked off happens more often than getting reattached. So now you have a gas that's made up of electrons and the positive ions. So that is called plasma.
So it's just ions. It's not actual molecules.
That's right.
Okay.
You have two separate gases that coexist in the same space. One is made of positive ions and one is made of electrons.
And this is brought about by the extreme heat that has caused this to become unstable.
That's right. It's very high temperature.
Cool. All right. So
we've got the sun. The sun's a plasma. It's made up of charged particles. And when charged particles move, connecting this back to what we were saying, they create
magnetism.
Yes, magnetic fields.
Is that right? Okay, good. So they're moving in these predictable patterns because of... Does the magnetic field cause them to move in the pattern, or do they intuitively form a pattern that generates a magnetic field?
So that's the great thing. They create a magnetic field, and that magnetic field evolves, and their pattern of motion evolves, and it evolves to a point where the magnetic field that they created causes them to move in the motion that they have. So it's self-consistent.
Okay, I see. It's like it's self-perpetuating.
That's right. And we call that a magnetic dynamo.
Okay, so the sun has this magnetic field that is rotating. Now, the sun is pretty fluid. So, the Earth rotates, but all of the parts of the Earth rotate at the same time because the Earth is solid. But in the sun, when it rotates, the equator of the sun actually rotates faster than the part around the poles.
The sun is kind of like, imagine a water balloon. You filled it with water and you've thrown it in the air and spun it. There's all sorts of weird fluids flowing around inside the sphere, even though it's still kind of spherically shaped. So what happens is that there's a lot of different processes causing the fluids to flow in the sun. So one of them, Jennifer mentioned, it's that you have this ball, and the ball of fluid is rotating, unlike the Earth. So the Earth is a nice rigid solid, so it's all rotating in step, right?
We're all moving together.
We're all moving together, right? The surface of the sun doesn't do that because it's a fluid. The equator of the sun is moving faster than rings of latitude would above the equator and below the equator. So the closer you get to the North Pole, the slower you're spinning.
Got it.
So that's one of the effects driving the motion of this fluid. Another one is actually really neat. It's convection. Imagine you take water, you put it in a pot, and you put the pot on the stove.
Okay, I can do that.
You turn on the stove.
Okay, got it.
So before it starts boiling, before you see the little bubbles rise up, what's happening is the heat is moving up through the bottom of this, and it's doing it through diffusion. So it just the heat kind of trickles up, and slowly the heat rises from the bottom to the top. And what happens is, if the temperature on the bottom is hot enough, you get big bubbles forming that loop up to the top. I was telling you earlier about how you smash these atoms together, and that essentially creates little particles of light that then want to escape the sun. And for the first 2/3 of the way out of the sun, they travel by diffusion, and it takes them hundreds of thousands of years to go from where they started out to the edge. But if they get close enough to the edge, they get into a region where there's convection bubbles. The bubbles of hot gas actually rises up like a lava lamp, or like a big blob of convection in your porridge. It turns out it's faster, it's more efficient for heat to travel in these big convection bubbles than it would be to travel by diffusion. And so the last, say, third of the sun, as these photons are making their way out from the center, they travel in these convection bubbles. And so what it means is the outer jacket of the sun is always bubbling. This fluid in it is always churning as big globs of heat come up from the center. Let's imagine the sun as an initial state. So it's like a bar magnet. So you have this big glob of fluid, and then there are magnetic field lines, like the tires, that go out through the middle, through the North Pole, and then loop down back through the bottom. Can you see all of the rings coming out? All right. So now imagine that they're elastic band. Now imagine instead of fluid moving, because this fluid is a plasma, the magnetic field lines are trapped in it. They're stuck where they are. In other words, you can't change the magnetic field lines without changing the flow of the fluid. You need to change the way all of this fluid's flowing. So I want you to imagine, instead of a big fluid flowing, that essentially you just have this big sphere, and then there are a whole bunch of dogs. Okay? And each of the dogs bites one of the magnetic fields and drags it along with it. But luckily, these magnetic fields are made of rubber, so we can stretch them as long as we want.
Okay.
So the fluid is rotating around the sun. As these dogs are running around the edge of the sun, they're wrapping the magnetic fields. They're stretching it and wrapping it around the center in a really twisty kind of way.
Okay, yeah.
Imagine if you had an apple with a rubber band sticking out through the middle of it, and then you took your finger on the equator of the apple, and then dragged your finger around the edge of it a couple times. So you were wrapping the elastic band around the edge. But,
yeah, hold on. Here, I can do this. Hold on just a second. I can set that up.
Right, get your apple.
So, yeah, I have a rubber band apple already, so let me just stretch it around there. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Right.
For sure.
So it gets all tangled up in it. It gets all looped around itself. And also, there's all this weird convection. So in essence, some of the dogs are biting the magnetic fields and then are running down straight towards the center, or are running up straight out of it. So that
they're pulling in all kind of weird directions.
Yeah, so all these dogs are taking these neatly arranged magnetic fields, and they're making it one big crazy tangle. Okay?
Okay.
So sometimes what happens is, it doesn't really happen with elastic bands. You take an elastic band in your hand and you twist it so that it becomes two rings separated by a twist, and then you twist that again, and you keep twisting and twisting and twist it. Eventually, what happens in a magnetic field is sometimes the end part will pinch off. So you get a little pinched off ring of magnetic field. And it's not attached to anything. It doesn't go through the middle and out through the outside anymore. It doesn't have any configuration that looks like. It's just a little ring.
Homeless.
Okay.
So we've got these magnetic fields. They're twisty. If they get twisted enough, they kink, and we form a closed loop that's no longer attached to the sun.
Okay, yep.
So the loops rise up, and they twist, they pinch off, and now we have a free blob of plasma that's wrapped up in its own magnetic field. Sometimes it's called a plasmoid. These things get pushed out into space violently by the tension in the magnetic field, which snaps, and the blob, which is called a coronal mass ejection, can be launched off the sun, carrying lots of plasma with it. And if one of these is directed towards the Earth and it pinches off and heads our direction, then we can get auroral activity, the northern lights, the southern lights, glowing in the sky. That's the link between what happens there on the sun and what we experience as a result.
Got it. But that's different from a solar flare.
There can be solar flares that don't have coronal mass ejections, and then there are solar flares that are associated with coronal mass ejections.
Is that because the coronal mass ejection is like an ionic thing and the solar flare is radiation?
The solar flare is radiation, like visible light, X-rays, and it gets to the Earth in about 8 minutes. And then the coronal mass ejection takes between a day and 3 days typically to get to the Earth.
So I'm thinking of the pictures I've seen of the sun where there's like a big splashy thing coming off of it.
That's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So there's a flash at the time that the splashy thing ejects. The flash is the flare, and the blob is the coronal mass ejection.
Let's back this truck up, because there's a neat little bit of insight here. Back it up to where there's a ring of magnetic field inside the sun. So it starts out inside the coat of the sun, and it's like a bubble or something, right? It has a lower density, it pushes itself up through the sun, and then as it crosses the surface of the sun, if you imagine this ring as, say, like a tire, and it'll intersect the sun at two places, right? One part where the tire tread is coming out, pointing out of the sun, and the other where the tire tread is pointing into the sun. And those two spots, those are sunspots. And then as the blob of magnetic field emerges from the sun and goes off into space, that ring of magnetic field, it becomes an elongated ring. That's essentially that long coronal mass ejection tail shape you see.
And so the sunspots are the points at which that ring shape intersects with the surface of the sun.
That's right.
Right.
The complicated thing about the plasma is that it has the same kind of pressure that a gas has. So if you watch the Weather Channel, you see the high pressure and the low pressure, and air in the atmosphere will move from high to low pressure, right?
Sure.
There's a pressure gradient, a difference in pressure. So that same thing exists in the plasma, and that kind of pressure is called plasma pressure. It's a measure of the average kinetic energy, which is the energy of motion of the particles in the gas or plasma, their average speed, roughly. But there's a second kind of pressure in the plasma, which is called magnetic pressure, and that's kind of like the pressure you feel when you push two north ends of magnets towards each other. You feel a pressure pushing back against you. And in general, the two things compete with each other. So if I have a region with really high magnetic pressure, then the regular pressure will be low there.
This is what causes things to sort of be turbulent within the sun, because these pressures are sort of warring with each other.
Right. The interplay of these two pressures is the thing that causes the motion of plasma in the sun. And if you have really densely packed magnetic field lines, like the elastic bands going through the plasma are very densely packed, that corresponds to high magnetic pressure, which means lower conventional pressure. So that means, in general, that area is lower temperature than the region that has a higher conventional pressure, lower magnetic pressure.
So the higher conventional pressure is generating more heat because things they're more agitated?
It's a higher temperature because the average speed of the particles there is higher.
Okay, so in the parts where there's a higher magnetic pressure, there's a lower conventional pressure, meaning that the elements are moving more slowly, meaning that their relative temperature is lower.
That's right.
But
exactly.
They are darker because light and heat are associated. So if you have more heat, you have more light, and vice versa. And less heat, less light.
And like you were saying, you've seen the false color images that are different wavelengths.
Mm-hmm.
So each of those corresponds to a particular temperature. We can tell a color in astronomical terms corresponds to a particular temperature.
So this is where you get like red giants or
right. So a blue star is hotter than a red star.
Or it's like, you know how in the middle of the fire it's blue because it's hotter, and then white's even hotter than that, and then at the outside of the fire it's red, so it's cooler?
Sure. And, there's also color temperatures, which I know from color theory, where 5500 Kelvin is a bluish color.
Right.
And 3800 Kelvin is an orangish color, and so on.
Right.
That's very good.
I know something.
Yeah, we're impressed.
Okay, so the reason that we see these sunspots is because they're darker, and the reason they're darker is because they're cooler, and the reason they're cooler is because they have a higher magnetic pressure, and the reason they have a higher magnetic pressure is because of that tire shape rising through the sun is being pushed by this more densely packed magnetic field within the sun itself.
You might actually be ready to teach freshman physics.
Yeah, that sounds pretty great.
You see how I put it in layman's terms really simply?
Right.
All right. Okay. So now, as this shape rises and the points of it spread farther apart, this is where you see the sunspots diverge. But eventually, it's not an actual ring where, as it rises out, they converge again. Does it just dissipate as it gets wider and wider and wider?
So I guess the magnetic field on the inside of the sun eventually reconnects with other magnetic fields and it dissipates. And then the ring on the outside gets flung out into space. Is that it?
That's right.
Right.
Okay, so those sunspots just sort of drift farther apart until the thing that is connecting them, that sort of external portion, is either detached from the sun or pieces of it are dragged back in. And so the sunspots themselves, do they then disappear?
They'll
don't.
eventually dissipate. As they evolve, they move apart from each other, and they will eventually dissipate.
Just like a relationship.
Just like a relationship.
I guess so, yeah.
They start off close together and then one
It's
moves
been a real
north,
instructive.
They just drift
other
apart.
moves to the
We
equator.
clarify a lot of things. It's okay. So you have a pair of sunspots that appear and diverge from one another, and that correlates with this magnetic field that is emerging from the suns. So the result of that is you have like an ionized portion that is independent of the body of the sun at some point.
That's right.
Is that what causes this coronal mass ejection, or is that a separate thing?
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Oh,
And so these ions are now coming toward the Earth and causing the northern lights.
yeah, that's right.
Right.
Earlier, I was telling you about how if you have a charged particle and it runs into a magnetic field, it will start to circle it. So essentially, you have these charged particles in the plasma of the sun. They come across this big magnetic field sticking out through the sun, and they start riding that magnetic field off of the surface of the sun.
Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm getting out of here, man. Finally, this is my ticket out of this
That's
joint.
right. And then so as the magnetic field blows off the sun, all of these particles ride the magnetic fields off into space.
Right. Finally, yeah. You can't tell me what to do, Dad. I'm on my own.
Right.
And so then that's when you'd hear like, well, there's a lot of sunspot activity that's causing whatever radio interference is because we have a higher number of like charged particles in our atmosphere.
Right.
I guess a kind of interesting thing is that, do you know what a tokamak is?
That's
Have you seen Iron Man?
does sound like another superhero character.
So Iron Man builds this donut that has plasma inside.
Sure, yeah.
That's called a tokamak, and he has a mini one in his chest.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our attempt to use these magnetic fields to contain fusing plasma for fusion so we can get power out of it.
But that's a fake thing, right? That's a movie.
No, that's something we're really trying to do.
It's kind of a fake thing. So the deal with it is in the movie, Iron Man gets all his power from this. And in real life, we haven't been able to get one that works so well that it can power itself.
Right.
Is it palladium is his fuel source in the movie? Is that just a made up thing, or is that like there's some property to that makes it actually relevant?
I think he says it sometime, but in essence, he's doing a nuclear fusion inside his little reactor that he's getting energy from, and then the palladium's helping him do it really efficiently.
Mm-hmm. Like a catalyst.
Yeah, or something.
Yeah, it seems like that is or at least in the second movie, it's a thing that is being expended by this reactive force.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah, so it's some kind of...
I just figured it was baloney.
No.
So the thing that makes a big problem with the actual tokamaks that we're trying to build is the same magnetic reconnection that causes coronal mass ejections. It's just the sun can handle having coronal mass ejections, and the tokamak can't deal with that. Once you have a kink in the magnetic field, you just lose it.
Loses its integrity.
No more fusion, right?
Just like when you make one compromise in your soul, it's like you feel like it's no big deal, but you're no longer that perfect ring of goodness that you once thought you were. And you realize the more kinks that come to the surface, the more energy you waste just trying to be a powerful person and trying to keep that purity about yourself.
Right, there are so many life lessons in plasma physics. It's like listening to John Tesh.
Anyway, I think we have half an hour worth of content.
I'm sure. We might have to do a sequel.
I think that we should end on the fact that there are lots of life lessons in plasma physics. Okay. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jennifer. You've pleased me. Your efforts have borne fruit, and that fruit is sweet. Here is some fruit. So, Brian, you get a donut peach.
Nom, 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 nom.
And Jennifer, you get a star fruit.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, wonderful. So I'd like to thank my guest, David Malki. Thanks, David, for coming on the show.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for telling me about sunspots, temporary phenomena on the photosphere of the sun that appear visibly as dark spots compared to surrounding regions.
Wow. So, my friends, if you want to email us, you can email us at barn@titaniumphysics.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at titaniumphysics. You can visit our website at www.titaniumphysics.com, or you can look for us on Facebook. If you have a question you'd like my titanium physicist to address, email questions to tiphyter@titaniumphysics.com. That's TIE Fighter at Titanium Physics. And if you're a physicist and would like to become one of my titanium physicists, email physics@titaniumphysics.com. We're always recruiting. So, let's talk about how you listen to Titanium Physicists. If you like listening to us on iTunes, that's great. You should leave us a review, because the only way people find us is if people write us reviews. So, if you write us a review this week, our ranking will improve. Please do so. And if you don't like to listen to us on iTunes, why not try Stitcher Radio? Titanium Physicist is on Stitcher Radio, and it makes it really easy to listen to us because you can subscribe to it and listen to us every week without having to go to our webpage. So, the Titanium Physicist podcast is a member of Brachiolet Media. If you've enjoyed our show, you might also enjoy Science Sort of or the Weekly Wienersmith. Please check them out. The intro music is by Ted Leo and the Pharmacist, and the end music is by John Vanderslice. Good day, my friends, and remember to keep science in your hearts.
Angela, don't be mad. There's something I gotta tell you, dear, before you come back here. I lost your bunny. I let him out of the cage. He was eating spring mix on the carpet, jumped through a window out into the haze, hop down Magnolia Boulevard, no way he'll survive.
I almost got some caught in my intestines, but then I didn't eat them, so it turned out to be fine.
Never eat the magnets.
You know, they feed those to cows.
Do they?
Yeah, to
Why
keep
would they do that?
shrapnel they pick up in the field all in one stomach.
Oh
What?
man, that's such a great idea. I should keep all the shrapnel I eat in one stomach.
Yeah, it's less harmful that way. The shrapnel stomach.
I'm going to pick up, I've learned something already.
Me too. Golly.
Yeah.
It looks like a pill.
Huh.
So magnetism and circulation are mutually exclusive. I'm talking about like your blood circulation, because you're going to have those rubber bands are going to start choking off that skin. You can get gangrenous. It's a real problem. So I know we're not talking about medicine here, but I just want to bring that up now in case that becomes a problem later.
Right. No, it's true. Circulation is important. So take a break whenever you're passing electrons through your...
It's just a sort of thing where it's like, every 15 minutes you should like take them off for a minute and just sort of do some exercises.
That's
like
right.
I just want kids at home to be prudent about it.
Yeah.
I really don't want this to turn into like a gay marriage debate, because I don't feel like it's the appropriate venue.
But it is a Paula Abdul song, Opposites Attract.
I feel like we should be more inclusive. Like, is there anything we can do to allow magnets to, if they want to, like north and north? Like, I'm totally in favor of that. Like, how can we make that happen?
You can push on them, but they don't like it.
Yeah.
They push, they
This is
repel
getting
each
real
other.
political, guys. Okay. All right, fine. I'll hear you out. So only North and South can be attracted to one another. Fine. Like, let's see where this goes, if it holds up to intellectual rigor, because then I'll have my counter argument about basic human rights. But go on.
Okay, I'm gonna go with my really good magnetic field metaphor. Okay, you got an electromagnet. It's kind of like a fan. There's a direction to it, okay? Imagine a big round floor fan.
Sure.
It sucks air in the back, and then the air comes out the front, and then, the air loops around and goes back in the back again, okay?
Okay.
Imagine if you have two fans. If you take those two fans and press them so that they're blowing air towards each other, you won't be able to press them together. Because we imagine the air coming around in a loop, so the loop goes through the back of the fan, out the front of the fan, and then loops around to the back. Those loops kind of get all compressed if you try to press them front to front or back to back. So you won't be able to press two fans together. Unless you press them together back to front. Press a fan back to front, the air coming out the front of the fan will get sucked in the back of the other fan, and they'll just kind of pull each other together. So there's a charge to magnetic fields. There's a north and a south to magnetic fields, and they're named like that.
After their inventors, Ryan North and
Ryan North and
Paul.
Interestingly, though, the Earth's north geographic pole is a south magnetic pole.
Right.
We named it like, before we understood.
This like more that's like Eurocentrism. Like I'm tired of imperialism impinging on science.
The direction of the magnetic field is the direction a compass would point, and the north end of the compass is attracted to the south end of the Earth, but it's the direction the north end of the compass points, so we call it north.
It's like a functional north, but a scientific south.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Magnetic south. Okay.
There's a lot of things in life that are like that, though. So I'm like, socially speaking,
that's right.
Like you could have a functional wife, just like who goes out to parties with you, but scientifically speaking, it's just more complicated than that. And you don't want to let your friends in on that because it's like they all came to your wedding, and it's just super awkward to explain like alternate lifestyles. And I think I have a good handle on where this is going.
Okay. Right.
Mm-hmm.
What's the water molecule look like?
It looks like a chevron shape.
It's like a Mickey Mouse face.
Sure.
It's got the two hydrogen ears and the oxygen face.
Sure. Is this like a sponsored thing? Because I don't believe that
maybe I shouldn't have said that.
Corporate branding is just infiltrating every part of our culture.
Do you think that physics pays for itself, David Malki?
Is there like a non-trademarked version of Mickey Mouse ears? Can we just call it like generic cartoon mouse head shape?
That sounds good.
Okay, let's stick with that. Maybe you can edit that back in.
New mouse, the open mouse.
The open mouse, yeah, open mouse.
Open mouse project. Okay, so we have.
Okay, now H is typically, was it 1 electron, 1 proton, right?
That's right, most of the time. That's normal hydrogen.
But there's like polyhydrogen where it's like,
right, there's
come on, baby, let's live in the. Okay.
So that's a radioactive sort of hydrogen, and it's in the sun. There's tritium, that's like triple hydrogen and has 2 neutrons. It's much heavier.
Like 100 degrees, 110. Sometimes it seems very warm to me. Or
the sun has a very wide range of temperatures, and the surface is something like 6,000 Kelvin, which is like 6,000 Celsius, roughly, give or take.
So in Fahrenheit, that's like 110 or 120 or
about 10,000 Fahrenheit.
That's right.
I'm sorry, I just fell off my chair. Okay.
But some parts of the sun are much hotter than that.
How is that possible?
But the surface, well, that's complicated. I think Jennifer's the expert on that part.
I demand to know in detail why that is, because otherwise I can't accept it.
You got a pizza. Have you ever eaten pizza pockets?
Pizza,
like
I
pierogies, and you bite into the middle, and the middle's really hot, and the outside's
much hotter than the
touchable.
outside.
Right, it's like that.
Yeah.
So what happens with the sun, there was a cloud of gas long ago, and there's gravity. All the particles are attracting each other. So all this gas was attracted to itself, and it compressed into a star. And it compressed so much that it heated up to the point where the electrons and protons are now free, roaming about in an orgy of moving ions and electrons.
Just abandoned. Just like I'm like here to do what I want to do.
Ions gone wild.
Yeah, I have that. It's not great, but it's okay. I do know it.
So the ions are so hot that they actually slam into each other and they create new elements. The hydrogen becomes helium. Helium becomes lithium. If the sun gets depressed, it's in good shape.
Sure.
Oh, I get it.
So that's going on in the sun.
These are all like they form certain types of elements. Like you're not going to get I don't even know what there wouldn't be in the sun.
Well,
There's
the
probably
heaviest
more
one,
like certain
the heaviest
things
one
than
you
that.
can make is iron. So there's no gold.
There's no gold in the sun.
That's right.
No gold.
The only way you
Right.
can get gold is a supernova. So at the very end, when the star explodes, you can get those heavy.
Then the gold comes flying out. It's like when you kill a boss and the coins.
That's
It's
right.
exactly like that.
The magnetic dynamo. That's a
Mhm.
really great phrase. Like it
sounds
feels
like,
very active.
Yeah.
That's a golden age of physics phrase.
Yeah.
I think Stan Lee
Absolutely.
came up with that, right?
He's
The
Silver
magnetic
Age.
dynamo. He
Magnetic
was
dynamo.
struck by the sun. One day, a stone fell from the sun, burning white hot. He grabbed it and then thought, oh no, I'm going to be late to my paperboy job. But it turns out his hands had the power of sunlight. And so no alley was dark enough for crime. He will have to somehow deliver these papers. And when he grabs them from his satchel, they burn at 6,000 degrees Kelvin. And now he has to pay for all the papers he ruined. It writes itself.
Where do we go from there?
I feel like I got a good handle on this, guys. I can take it from here, probably.
Okay.
I understand that the Earth has it's like a ball that's like spinning, but what causes the sun to rotate? Is it just that magnetism, or is it gravity, or is it...
The sun's always been rotating. The gas that created the sun was rotating, and so the sun is still rotating.
Conservation of angular momentum. That's
Yeah.
what we call it.
Just like when an ice skater pulls his or her arms in, the ice skater rotates faster. The gas coalesced into the sun, and it spun up because it was already spinning a little bit. Now the sun is spinning.
So is this motion what keeps the gases and plasma in the sun compressed and heated? Like, is this what we talk about the sun dying? Is that when it slows down and all those electrons don't move as fast?
Well, it remains heated because you've got nuclear processes going on in the core of the sun.
Right, okay, so you had this big cloud, and then it collapses down on the center, and it turns into a big ball. And
Okay.
the deal is that at the center of this ball, it's so hot that different atoms are fusing together. So hydrogen sticking to hydrogen atoms and making helium atoms. And the way nuclear physics works is that when you do that, when you stick two hydrogen atoms together to make a helium atom, you end up with energy. And so as this thing is compressing all of these atoms together, it's liberating a lot of energy. And that energy is what's causing the sun to be, really, really hot. So that energy is kind of escaping and boiling off the sun. In essence, what happens is it's kind of like a log where the center of it is burning and the outside of it is just conducting the heat out.
So this energy is just massive nuclear processes are spilling energy forth
Right.
at alarming rates, and somebody has to stop it
Nobody has to
before
stop
it destroys the city.
Stanley, no!
We're gonna put out the sun. Do you realize 100% of supervillains are nourished by plants from the sun
It's true.
that gain their energy from the photosynthesis? If we can put out the sun, no supervillains will have the energy metabolized to create villainy.
Yeah, there's a problem with that argument.
Yeah, no,
I'd like to hear it.
no, that's right.
Gay problem?
Well, we would all die.
Yeah, I mean,
Sometimes a little sacrifice is required to stop villainy from taking over New York City singly. All right, so please continue. So the sun is,
dog agrees.
guys. Let's be serious.
Okay,
Sun
so we're burning the
is
hydrogen.
burning. Okay, we have this ball circling around and plasmodically
Right.
gyrating.
Well, if you look at the sun, you see all these blobs of convection, don't you?
Don't look at the sun.
Okay, so
Lawyers know.
if people look at the sun with instruments, they see big convection.
If people stare at the sun with their eyes wide open, what do they? What can they? I think
Then
your
you
eyes
go
would.
blind.
Guys, your eyes would adjust to it eventually.
It's not recommended.
Here's what I want to know. This is a serious question. It seems like this is something that humans have a hard time of, right? Looking at the sun.
Yes.
Why do you think we have evolved? Like, the sun has been there as long as life has been on this planet. Don't you think that we would have like naturally selected for people who were able to look at the sun?
If there was food on the sun, then we would. But there's no food on the sun, so
Here's my suggestion.
yeah.
I think that there were some people who said, hey, my eyes are adjustable enough. I have evolved a mutation that allows me to look at the sun and see it's just like in incredible detail. It's just this ball of burning plasma.
Right.
And the other people said, no, when we look at it, all we see is this brilliant disk that we can't see any details on, and we think it is a god.
Right.
And they go, no, dude, it's just burning plasma. And then the god people put those people to death for being heretics, and then they all died out.
That's possible.
And we are descendants
Well,
of the people who thought that the sun was...
If you're busy staring at the sun, you're not likely to reproduce.
This is true.
Well,
But if
they
you're
don't
looking
stare
around-
at the sun all day long. In the same way that I can see a tree, but I don't stare at trees all day long, at least not anymore. Ever since I got a job.
That's the worst thing about jobs.
Well, your mate,
Yeah, right. They prevent you from staring at trees.
I don't know.
That's what I told my boss. Can I have a tree break? I don't smoke. Can I have 5 minutes every hour to go look at trees? And he said, David, I've been waiting for someone to say that for years. Yes, you can have a tree break. Now I have a tree break.
Yeah.
sure. This works really well if you have a yo-yo string.
Man, the
Have
metaphors
you
are
worked-
piling on the metaphors here.
Yeah,
So a
it's
dog
physics.
with a yo-yo eating an apple on a rubber band in a bowl of porridge on top of a lighthouse with a friendly cat
a
upside
dead
down.
cat in a box.
Don't forget the dogs.
You
Oh,
forgot the
geez.
dogs. But don't worry,
Yeah,
you're almost
all
there.
right. And the whole thing is on a boat that's on a stormy ocean
Right.
that a monster is eating because of a galaxy upside down on the electoral college.
I think you're ready to
Right.
take Physics 101.
Anyway,
I'm ready to teach physics 101, friends. It's causing radio interference because it's interfering with the free flow of radio waves, which are that are part of the. There's only like one type of wave, right? Like some of it's some of it's visible,
There-
some of it's radio, some of it's
That's right.
there's only
Wait,
one
would you-
electromagnetic kind of wave.
electromagnetic spectrum, right?
Right.
I was going to use that, and I was not totally sure if it was right, but now I know
That's
it
right.
is. So I'm going to use
There
it
are
all the
many
time,
kinds of-
basically for everything.
Right.
But a sound wave is different, and plasmas have
geez.
several.
All right, forget it.
other-
I'm out. Sound waves different? No, too much. Soundwave was created from an experiment in a
no.
laboratory where a giant stereo speaker exploded all over a young pizza delivery boy. Every time he went to deliver his pizza, every footstep created a wave of sound that shattered windows in the area. But he couldn't pay for the repairs if he could never get his pizzas delivered.
Oh, all of Stan Lee's heroes these days are coming up pretty tragic. They're always deep in debt trying to pay off the damage they create.
That's what makes superheroes relatable. They have to be someone that the audience feels like they could become.
There's lots of people with credit problems these days, I guess.
It's funny though. If you look at the end of Spider-Man 2, Doc Ock has that mini sun, and it has all these loops on it, just like on the sun.
That's right. But somehow he's pushing
really
the
is
loops
connected.
back in with his claws, isn't he?
That's right.
I don't know what that had to do with anything.
Dr.
I
Octopus
don't think any.
was driven to a life of crime when his home was foreclosed upon thanks to a mortgage from Bear Stearns. This became Gilbert Gottfried halfway through.
I did.
Yeah.
I hate superheroes.
Oh, okay.
Favorite superheroes are the ones that are unapologetically vulgar.
Like, fuck, man.
You said it, not me. My favorite!